Row Faster Series Part 4, rowing technique. Again, quite broad subject, so I'm not going to go too deep into any particular part of the stroke. I'm going to try and cover it from a general aspect of from beginner-ish through to elite, well, at least to where I got to. So I'll kind of walk you through some of the most important technical parts. And again, from beginner through to elite, there are plenty of similarities. It's just on varying details that you want to look at, and it's varying amounts of precision, but it's very much the same concept. So a bit of me on the erg as a beginner, and then when I retired, and then same with the boat, talking through the different parts. So first one, let's go for probably one of the first things I started with was, so again, I started rowing around 2012. This is me on the rowing machine. To be honest, one thing I was doing okay was the sequencing. So hands away, body over. That's generally one of the first things that you want to get right. I think it just sets up the rest of the stroke quite well. And was pulling pretty hard and like leaving my arms nice and long as I drived. But certainly, and again, this is going to be one of the things that's going to be a transferable technique from beginner through to elite that I always go on about, is using the hips, making sure you're suspending your weight and loading up. But for me, one thing I can just see is that when I load, I'm not basically lifting my weight off the seat. I'm keeping my weight on the seat. I don't know what that drawing's meant to be. And I'm just pushing hard. I am using my legs. I'm mainly using my quads, but I'm not using my hips as well. You can see my weight's very dead. Also, body angle has opened up quite a fair bit. And generally, you want to be in this position holding your body angle as you drive the legs. Because as you get to this part in the stroke, ideally just when your legs are about to straighten, you then still have all of this body angle to play with and then open with when you get through to the finish. And using that, especially people that have strong deadlift or strong in the gym, you want to use these hips. It's one of the most powerful motions you can do, is that opening of the hips. But yeah, to go, again, what I always say is go one step back and don't just look at the bit you're trying to improve. So if we're trying to improve front end connection, then we have to look one step back. So for me, that's as you go into the catch. Now, what I definitely would say is that my feet are too high for one. It's much harder to get your weight over your feet when your feet are up higher. Think if you're lying on the couch and you had your feet on a footstool, versus having your feet on the ground. It's much harder to stand up when you have your feet up higher. So we want that idea of standing up at the catch. So what I would say to me, lower my feet, and then when I rock over, get my weight onto the foot plate. That just helps load it a little bit better. And then also when I rock over, just start thinking about squeezing my glutes and activating my glutes. You have to have them switched on as you approach the catch. Otherwise, you won't be able to load your legs. So yeah, and then as you slide forward, you want to have these two things, points of contact, loaded like a trigger. Sliding forward, and then you get to this point, it should be much easier to load in the hips and drive with the hips rather than opening the back and just using the legs. For me as well, I got quite a bad back injury quite early on in my career. If you wanted to call it a career, I guess. And kind of through two of the main problems were my hips were very tight and my back would bend very slightly as I drove. So if you use your hips and you use your core in the correct way, you'll avoid doing that. But yes, I'd say now this is going to kind of be the theme of like moving on to everything on the erg. One thing I'm doing well is leaving the arms nice and long as I hang, and just that idea of keeping it like a rope and suspending and leaving it alone right until the very last second and just really driving the legs. So some good things, some good starting points. Definitely want this body angle further forward and to lift the weight off the seat more as I drive. Apart from that, my sequencing was good. I'd maybe suggest when I come through, my chin kind of dips down and didn't mean to do that. Kind of slump down a little bit with my chest. You can see just there, it's just a very slight slump. But apart from that, good with the arms, good with the rock over. It's mainly the front end and the drive that I'm looking at improving. So on to the next part. I think we'll do, so this is me in the single. I have no idea when, 2012, 2013, 2014 maybe. Still, and I think that was an Italy football top. I was avoiding getting into the rowing kit. I didn't want to wear one piece for a very long time, as I think a lot of beginners try and do. But for me, what I would suggest looking at is making sure that when I tap my hand, this is kind of a theme, and again, I'll kind of tie this in with some of the other stuff. But actually, the first thing would be a cleaner finish. Now, this this footage is from like 2012 on probably a Nokia or something, so it's very hard to see. But you can see that there's quite a lot of wash that gets dragged about in the finish. So coming through, you would want to make sure that one big thing I think probably everybody can do right. It's such a good way to get free speed, as I always say, like more speed for the same effort. If your blade's squared in the water like that, you want to push your hands down and pop the blade out like that, again a giant square, and then turn it feathered. If you're under the water, even if your blade's still kind of half buried like that, and then you start turning the blade around while the blade is underneath the water, you're just basically, if this was the water line, your blade's coming out like this, and if you turn the blade like that and you're pushing your hands down, you're pushing that scoop of the water like up, so it makes it harder to balance. You get less run, but what the thing it also does is it dumps the bows into the water, and that causes more resistance on the hull. So one of the easiest changes I think you can do is push your hands down with the blade square, then turn it feathered, then move your hands away. One simple drill you can do to combat this, and again, I think regardless of what level you're at, you can probably do it better. Sit at the finish, boat still, keep your hands like that, just tap up and down with your hands, keeping the blade square, practicing that motion, trying to ingrain it into your head so that you can take it with you into normal rowing. So that's be the first thing I'd probably coach myself into doing, is to just get a cleaner finish. I think it really, really helps. And it feels better, like you just get a really good feeling from it. It just makes setting up the boat so much easier. And then again, something that I wasn't that good at here, but I was good at when I went to one of my clubs, I got coached into me, was tapping down shape, it's called, with the hands, where you just tap the blades down, keep your hands low, and then when you get to the catch, lift up directly. So you can just have a quicker catch basically. But the common thing, especially with beginners, is tap down a little bit and then go back up, because your blades are dragging along the water. That's nice and comfortable. It's not as unbalanced, whatever the word is. So you go back up with the hands. You're going along like this, you keep them nice and high, it's nice and stable, and then when you get to the catch, roughly, if you think your blade is like along the water, so if you're keeping it stable like that and your blade's close to the water like that, when you go to square, you have to, if you squared, you'd hit the water, so obviously you have to push your hands down and then lift them up. But if you had your hands lower the whole way, you can just square and then lift directly. It just means a much quicker catch, a much better connection. It's also faster, especially when you go up to like higher rates. So if you're somebody that struggles to get the rate up in a boat, then that's something I would suggest doing, is keeping your hands lower as you slide forward. And then all you have to do is square and then lift. Again, you might be getting told to square earlier, but you find you struggle with it because you're not tapping down enough. So again, that's a big part as well. And again, I'll try and touch on the catch. So catch. Again, this is probably a whole nother video in its own way, so I'll touch on it briefly. But what I would say with the catch is you want to, if you imagine, right, this boat is sitting still right now, the perfect catch, you want to lift your hands straight up when you're fully extended at full slide. And if you did that, the blade would just go straight in. And if the boat was still, remember this is the kind of theory, if the boat was still, there wouldn't be any backsplash here or any backsplash here. Okay, maybe a little bit from the loom shaft. But when you want to do that motion when the boat's moving, and when you do that straight up and down motion at the catch, it's impossible to not backsplash the blade. So one thing I often coach is say, you can look for that feeling, you can force that feeling, because it's one of the things you can chase. Try and get an outcome rather than like trying to do the process right. And chances are if you backsplash the blade like that, you're getting better connected at full slide. The second part to that is you also want to, so as you place the blade into the water like this, and the blade goes down, there's a little vortex in front of the spoon and the water, and that needs to fill up before you push. A big problem is when people place like that, and then they've not waited for this air to fill up before they push, and they push, and it's the same effect as if, say, your blades were out of the water and you just slammed on the foot plate there. Think if these blades weren't in the water, the stern's just going to go that way. And it's a really good way to check the boat. It's obviously something you don't want to do. So make sure that you backsplash, again, I'll just say backsplash the blade in, lift on the way going forward. It's kind of a counterintuitive thing. It feels like you're backing the blade as you approach the catch. And then wait for the spoon to fill. You have to spend a bit of time, wait, lift, let the water fill in. When you get that lock, you won't have to move away. The boat will just move with you, and you can really suspend. And again, I didn't mean to open the emojis tab. Okay, again, trying to touch on all of these things lightly, as I understand I can ramble. Clean finish, take the blade out square, tap down with the hands, lift the blade in. Try and tie in some of that work that I was talking about on the erg as well, using your hips, using your glutes, getting the weight rocked over onto the foot plate. Again, a really good thing to do in the boat is that thing on the erg with rocking over to the foot plate, because it lowers your center of gravity lower. For me, I have a massive head, so my center of gravity was quite high. It was quite difficult to balance a boat, among other reasons. So if you can rock over, get your weight down low, helps you balance the boat. You can balance with your feet rather than balancing with your hands or with your hips. So yeah, everything's super connected. When you make loads of these changes, it just ties together in other areas that you wouldn't expect to be working on. You can be working on the catch and somehow, the leg drive gets better. So yes. Okay, next one. Let's do the erg. So again, maybe interesting to see kind of the progression. The sequencing's fairly the same. I'm probably pulling in a good bit higher, which I know some people don't like, but if your finishes are fine, I say do it on the erg because it's going to make faster splits. Fight me if you disagree. But so same ideas, obviously keeping the rock over, but I think one thing I've done better throughout the years on the erg, obviously I've lowered my feet, so that's easier. Again, going from a thick sole shoe to no shoe makes your feet lower as well, just naturally because the sole isn't pushing up as much. So if you struggle, you can't get your feet down any lower, try like Converse, like thin shoes, or go barefoot and bear with some blisters for a little while. But yeah, you can see here, I think anyways, it's a hard thing to spot, but when I rock over, I get my weight much down much lower, and then I'm more connected when I get into the catch. And again, another thing as well, again, something that's maybe a bit harder to see, is using the glutes and squeezing them. I could very well not be using them here, but I think the tell is the way I'm driving. So looking like much better connection here. I'm in a much more forward position with the body, using the legs much better, and it looks like I just lift off with the hips slightly more. So again, just that's something I've worked on throughout the years, something that helped the erg scores and helped the boat and helped balance in the boat as well. And then just a nice long, you can see I just get to maybe here, body still hanging forward, legs are just about to be straight. Again, I'm not with the longest legs. So leaving the body nice like that, arms nice and long, and then when I get to here, I can really open with the back and use that powerful hip extension. Well, powerful. For me, it was. And then nice long press. And again, one thing that probably to mention as well is this second part of the stroke, when you come through with the back and the arms as well, make sure that you're still pushing the foot plate away. You have to be pushing the foot plate as you come and open with your back and as you come and pull through. Imagine you're doing tug of war and your legs are straight. You still want to pull. You'd still be pushing through the foot plate. So yes, again, touching on these things, top secret scores. Yeah. Again, now I've posted this one on social media before on Instagram. One thing I was really working on this year was just really good hip mobility. So you can see it here. I think my hips, this is probably the most rock over I've ever had because I wanted to really transfer my technique into the single, moving from this position through to here. It just means if you're more rocked over, when you get to I'm trying to pause it, I can't do it. There's no slow motion feature on this thing. When you get to here, if your body's further forward, you then just have more to play with and then more force that you can transfer through this part of the stroke. If you're upright here, especially if you're a shorter rower, if you're quite upright and then you can only come through to here, That's less time that you can transfer in force. You want to be pushing for a long amount of time, so you want to be thinking, how can you extend the amount of time that you're pushing on the stroke? Yes, on to the next one. Okay, so again, I've got so much footage. I couldn't find any from, so kind of the two most influential coaches in my career were Richard Walsh and Colin Williamson. So we'll go for this one. I couldn't find any footage working with Ricky, but one thing, Ricky, one thing he really helped me transfer in the boat was the clean finish. So square, blades away, and like a really powerful finish as well, like coming through and making sure that you're suspended and that you're connected. So some of that stuff I was talking about in the erg there, where I'm pushing through the foot plate and you're really suspending and driving low on the legs, even when you're coming through with the arms, that you're still pushing through on the legs. And that's something I picked up. A big thing I picked up from Ricky. And then that kind of last part of the finish is the tap down in the square, really clean like that. Like imagine 2 pieces of toast being popped from a toaster and then feathered. Like pop the toast, spread the butter or peanut butter or whatever. And then, yeah, so that was kind of one of the things. I couldn't find any footage from that, but again, you can see it in my rowing now. It's just much cleaner with the blades. You can see here. Now this is, again, so first thing was just the finish here. Much cleaner, popping the blade out square. You can see I could still even do it better here. Still slightly turning them while they're still in the water. But pop the blade out square and then down and away. The thing that we worked on this is me when I joined Edinburgh Uni in around 2018, was shape. So literally very, very simple, but I think good coaching when done well is made simple. So you can talk and use all these technical terms and really long explanations. That's probably what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to keep it quite simple, but tapping down with your hands, pushing them down low and giving your blade the chance to square and then lift, rather than tap down, blade goes down close to the water, and then to square your blade, you have to push your hands down, lift the blade up, and then miss the catch. So this is something I did a lot of with Colin at Edinburgh. You can see here, even into the headwind, helping loads, but it just allows for a much more direct lift at the catch. Again, this is something I was just trying out for the first time, so it was very tippy and frustrating. I think in this session, I think I can actually remember it. It's one of those sessions you just remember. But yeah, getting the hang of it, starting to feel the benefit of it, and the catch just comes much more naturally, because if you've got your hands down low, then all you have to do is just take your hands off the handle, and then the blade just falls in. Again, think about how little effort that is to lift your hands. You're literally just taking the weight off the handle, and you want the blade to fall in. The blade wants to go into the water. Just let it. Don't fight it. Don't feel like, come on, like you have to go into the water. And the blade's just like, mate, yeah, I know, I want to go. You don't have to tell me that. Just let it go. A very hard change to make. It takes a lot of consistent, persistent effort, focus. Even when these choppy conditions here, it starts falling apart. Really have to stay switched on and make sure make sure that you've constantly got that technical focus. It can literally, like, this change took me probably 2 years to ingrain that I could also do it at a high rate. So what should we do now? So this is me at GB Center, top secret footage. Low rate, I believe this is maybe a UT1 piece, or not. One thing I learned over the years, now this is something I actually learned rowing with Will Fletcher for 2 months at Henley. We did an old boys double, and one thing he really talked about that made a big difference for me is like staying in a good range, but in all honesty, rowing shorter sometimes can make a massive difference. I really think that coaches are afraid to tell you to row shorter. They have to use words like, oh, you're overreaching, or it's stay in a good range, or whatever. In reality, it's just row shorter. If you're too compressed, if you got so compressed, your hands were like really wide, your knees were over your toes, the blades were perpendicular to the boat, picking up that force becomes very difficult. If you just keep your hands slightly closer together, it makes it easier to catch the blade. It makes it easier to come out of the position strongly. It makes it easier to when I say catch the blade, like fill the spoon and let it get locked in before you push, because you're not in a super outreach position. Like imagine you're trying to change the the buttons on a TV or something, and the TV's in front of you, or the TV's like really far away and you have to reach like that. It's much harder when you're really reached out. So if you stay in a good compressed range, then you don't have to. It makes the catch much easier, and you're moving out when when the blades are perpendicular to the boat. That's when it's easiest to transfer force. So if you have the blades slightly behind perpendicular, it's just a lighter load to move out from. So again, this is, some people need to row longer. I'm not gonna, obviously that's, in my case, I was rowing too long. And I think a lot of people do, especially people that struggle to get up the rates. But yeah, and another thing I worked on with Will that made a big difference before I got in here, I think these are some of the biggest changes, was filling the spoon. And it was something that, with Ricky, it was the finish and connecting through the finish and suspending through well. And then tapping out square. With Colin, it was like a lot about the recovery and making sure that you're rocking over and sequencing well, tapping down, getting shape with the hands, and then squaring early enough to then allow for the catch. And with Will Fletcher, again, I didn't mention Will Fletcher earlier, but probably where I picked up the most, staying in a good range and making sure you fill the spoon before you push. So yeah, it's a harder thing to kind of talk about here, but the last thing I would say I was working on in the stroke was also, when you stay in a good range, you can then accelerate more through the second half of the stroke. If you're loaded up and you're really, really reached out far, and then you get this really heavy load, when you pick up a heavy load, it's really hard to accelerate it because you've got so much force. If you have a slightly lighter load at the front, you can then build on it more. Force equals mass times acceleration. So if you're not accelerating the force, then you're not producing as much as possible. So use your back, open your back hard. And again, that just kind of ties in with what Ricky said as well. So yeah, kind of going for a full circle here. But yeah, I don't know, maybe just finish talking it through again. You can see, I'd say I was maybe rowing a little bit too flat here with my blades. Like, it's one of those changes that can go as you work on something else. Like, the next thing can just, the thing you were working on before can kind of just crop on. So one thing I always say when I'm coaching is, when you make a good change, make sure that you take it with you and you don't forget it. You will lose it a little bit, but just always keep it in the back of your head, and make sure that you cement it. If you find you're getting if you're getting bored on working on one change, then just go back for like maybe one stretch of a 2K, go back and really nail in what you were doing before. So yeah, and then finish maybe with some higher rate stuff. Now again, you can see him maybe getting a little bit of clearance off the blades, a little bit of space, but not enough. It could be more for sure. Just looking back on this thing is something you always need to keep coming, especially as you go up the rates. More shape. It's so easy to lose it. Some changes like the catch and the finish and drawing through, they come naturally up the rates, but some of them you really have to work to keep with you. But one thing actually here is probably quite good to see. Now, ideally, you're in your rocked over position earlier than this, with your legs maybe more straight. And then you're in the rocked over position, but just rating, I don't know, I was rating here 32, 34. You can definitely, you want to really stay still. So I think when I look back at these, I think one thing I thought was good as a good example was like looking at this part of the stroke, look at how still you can be with the body. So again, I feel like I'm bragging here, but I think that's a good example. Watch how still the body is. If the more still you watch, there's absolutely no way close to some of the best scullers in the world, but look at like the World Championship final, and look at one of the things I think they all have in common is how still they are in their upper bodies. So that's something I always really try to work on in the single. Any weight that dips at the catch just dips the stern and disrupts the run of the boat. So if you can stay super still in your body as you slide forward, especially that last part, it makes the catch easier. You don't take it in your shoulders as much. You engage your legs more, and your stern just runs so much more flat. So yeah, maybe an example here. Again, forgive me. Oh, there is a slow motion. There, like watch the stillness. Yeah. Okay, I'll just kind of play that back a few times maybe. Still. Super loose in the shoulders. Try and keep your face in passive as well. and just let the blades fall in. Again, a bit tippy, but that's fine. Just stay on top of it and stay as still as possible. But yeah, okay, I think that's going to be it, to be honest. I can't see the timer on this recording, so I have no idea how long I've been rambling for. Yeah, let me know if you've enjoyed this content. The next part is going to be about recovery and using that to kind of influence your training. A bit about sleep, nutrition, some things like that. But yeah, if you found this helpful, like it, comment, subscribe, the usual stuff. If there was any technical parts in the stroke that you think you'd like to hear more about, there's like, you could do an hour-long webinar on all of them. So if you if you found there's one specific part of the stroke you'd like to see more of, or something I talked about that you would like to see more of, then please do let me know. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it just kind of gives me some ideas of like what sort of stuff